Good morning, good morning. It's time for Pause with Elizabeth Eleanor, and we're talking about interdependence in relationships today. So I'd love for you to say hi in the chat and how you're going, all the things. Love to see you if you're doing hashtag replay. Interdependence is not something that I even knew the wording for. Like, it wasn't for me, way back it was codependent and independent was the big deal, right? I'm just seeing that I'm on. Yes, I am. There I am. Independent was the big deal for women because we all want to choose independence, because when we were growing up, if you're my age, you would have seen a lot of codependency, and it's really different generations have different styles with this, right? We've been conditioned. When I was growing up, the whole thing was codependency between partners, husband and wife. Generally it was husband and wife back then, and so there was a lot of codependency. So, and then hey Stacey, how are you, hon? I haven't seen you in ages. Love for you to say hi in the chat. I can see I've got about 4 people on here. Where do you sit? Are you in codependent, interdependent, or independent relationship, right? What are your thoughts? Because I didn't know the difference between the three myself until I started playing with this. So when I was growing up, I saw a lot of codependency in relationships because that's the style of life. That was, my family was a bit different because my dad was sick on a kidney machine, and so he was very codependent on my mum to support us. We were all, right? When you're a kid, there's a lot of codependency because all your emotional needs need to be met by your parents, right? And so that's what codependency is this emotional attachment to this external source, someone outside of you that is there to really, fulfill your needs, validate you in some way, to emotionally support you. And there's a lot of, powerlessness in codependent relationships. Hey, Carmel, lovely to have you on here too. Hey, I just realised who you are. Lovely to have you here, hun. Are you still up in Cairns? I think last time I saw you, you were selling your house, which is a really long time ago. So, often in codependent relationships, there's a lot of sacrificing. So your needs don't always get served. And this is something that women did all the time, right? Like, their needs weren't being met. There was a lot of sacrificing for their partner and their children. There was a lot of being a stay-at-home mom and doing all the chores and not fulfilling their own dreams and all of those things. And so the thing with codependency is that there can be a lot of resentment, a lot of burnout, a loss of individual identity as well, right? And that's what we discovered with in the 60s, when women sort of started going, hey, what about me? I need a voice here, and I want to express myself and be fulfilling my own dreams and my own desires, and stuff you all, right? And the movement sort of happened, and the burning of the bras and all of those things sort of started coming into play as women sort of started taking their rights back. And so through that process, they started recognizing that they actually end of May separated living with a okay, that's all good. That's awesome. Glad to hear. And so there's a lot of this might be really good for you, Carmel, right? There's a lot of codependency that can happen, and especially with things like with our kids. I see a lot of parents, a lot of women that become very dependent on their children and sacrificing their own desires and wants and needs. I remember when my son was going to preschool, so he was the youngest, and it meant all my kids were at school, and I was standing at the gate. Who remembers this, right? Standing at the gate. Hey, Irene. Standing at the gate with all these other women, and these, some of them were crying. Oh my God, my baby's going to school. What am I going to do? That empty nest syndrome, right? And I was like, yes, I get some time to myself. And so there is so many different parts to being codependent, and it's not a healthy place to be, because when you're codependent, you're relying on somebody else, and somebody else is living their own life, right? And their own version of themselves and their own identity. And so when you're codependent, you can often be disheartened by other people's actions, because they're living their life. They're not just thinking about you and the way you should be, like how they should behave towards you, and you're not their center of attention. You shouldn't be anyway, unless you're both in a very codependent relationship where both of you are in that space where you can't live without each other. A very unhealthy place to be, because hey, shit happens, life happens, something can go really awry, and this is why so many people have this earth-shattering, oh my God, something happened to my partner and now they're no longer here, and they can't survive. I actually heard a story of a woman that her and her husband were multi-millionaires, and something happened with her husband. I can't remember, maybe it was a heart attack or something like that, and she had no idea what the accounts were. Like she had no idea what was going on in their world. She had just been so codependent on him to look after her and look after her needs that she had no concept of how to even find, she didn't even know what bank they banked with, right? Where the paperwork was, all of those things. Put her in a very hairy position. And she had to grow up really, really quickly, right? You can imagine. Has anyone ever been in a codependent relationship? I know that for me, my mum, when I was a kid, I was very codependent with my dad. He looked after me. He was like my mum, because he was stay at home. And we were like best friends, we were really close. And he died when I was 15, and it just sent me in this massive spiral. I went off the rails for like 10 years. But I want you to think for a moment. This is all about reflecting, right? Pause is the opportunity, and this is a conversation between you and I, right? This is an opportunity for you to stop, pause, and reflect. Where are you at when it comes to these subjects that we're talking about on these calls? So where are you in codependency? Have you had a codependent relationship at any stage? Are you in any codependent relationships right now? And how does it feel, right? When you stop and reflect, you get to start feeling your feelings. How comfortable do you feel in that relationship if you are in a codependent relationship? Maybe it's that the other person is dependent on you, right? And when they're kids, different story, right? Until they get to teenagers and they start living their own life, there's a reason for them to be codependent, because you're the little bubble, right? You're the little bubble that they need to feel safe and survive, and you've got to give them all their needs and meet all of those things. But I want you to stop and pause and reflect on any of your other relationships, friendships, colleagues at work, business colleagues, your business mentor as well. That's another one. If you're in business, it can be that you're codependent with your business mentor, which is not a very healthy place to be at all, right? And so these things, when you're codependent, is creating patterns of behavior that mean that you are functioning not in a sovereign way. You're functioning in a way where you're constantly thinking outside of yourself of other people or that person in particular, right? So let's just park that for a moment. Codependency, right? And then, in the 60s, life started to change. Women started wanting their rights, and rightly so, because they weren't given any rights before that, right? Way back, women weren't even allowed to, if their husband died, their children were given to his brother or their family. So they weren't even allowed to have their own children, right? So there was, let alone the vote and all of those things. So independence became a big deal. And independence was, for us as women, for example, was something that we had to fight for, to get our rights met. But what happens when you're living in a relationship, and especially a relationship with a partner, a husband or a wife or whatever it might be, just a partner in general, right? If you're independent and they're independent, then what's happening is you're living separate lives. There's a lot of emotional detachment. There's a lot of not considering respecting other people's boundaries, or respecting other people's or considering other people's emotions, right? You're living as if you're by yourself and you're in your own space, right? And so the emphasis on independent is that the person is thinking about their own goals and activities. They're thinking about their own well-being. They aren't taking any consideration of the other person whatsoever. And so independent sounds really nice, but when you're in a relationship, independent can be quite lonely for the other person. And often you'll find that there's people that are independent are connected to someone that's codependent in the relationship, right? Because they're desperately looking for that validation, seeking that approval, because the person that's independent is not willing to give it because they're too busy living their own life, doing their own thing, fulfilling their own dreams and desires and their own needs and wants and stuff, and they don't need the other person, right? And so it can be quite soul destroying if you're in a relationship with someone. And I know I personally was in a relationship with someone that was like this. My second relationship was exactly like this, where there was no emotional connection, and it wasn't like that to start with, but once we got married, everything changed. Complete flip of the switch, and the whole experience completely changed, and he just did his own thing. Now, because I was quite independent before I met him, I was okay with it to start with, because I thought this is the way we do it, right? Like there was this connection between the two of us, and then we just started fulfilling our own dreams and desires and all of those things. But what happened was, it actually stopped that connection of mutual support. It stopped, there was no real creation between the two of us. We weren't creating together. There was a lack of emotional intimacy. It just really meant I felt very detached and isolated. And the more I started to speak to him about it, the more I felt codependent on him. Like, the more I was trying to get my opinions and be validated and some sort of emotional support. The more I became very frustrated because I didn't feel like I was being seen or heard. So I want you to consider that as an independent person. And ladies, anyone that's single at the moment, how independent are you? And is your independency stopping you from actually opening up to having the opportunity to connect with a partner? Because when we are really in that place of so independent that we don't need anyone, it's good. There's two sides to it, because that was one of the reasons why I think I met Tim, or I know I met Tim, was because I was very independent. I had my life all sorted out. I didn't need a partner. Everything, my spiritual growth was fine. My emotional support for myself and friends were really good. I had everything sorted out, so I didn't actually need anyone. But that could have been really detrimental when I did meet him, because when I met Tim, if I had been so independent that I didn't desire him, or I didn't want to open up to having this, co-creation, it could have gone very sideways, because then he would have felt invalid. He wouldn't have felt emotionally supported. He wouldn't have felt like I wanted to see him or experience any, companionship with him, right? So independent can be quite strong and healthy, but then it can go to the extreme where it's almost like you're isolating yourself from everybody else and not actually opening yourself up to the opportunity to give and take and reciprocal energy, right? So love to hear in the chat, where do you sit with that? Like, especially you single women, right? Are you in a space where you're really in that independency and you don't need to connect with anyone, and that actual belief is the very thing that might be holding you in that space? And when we've been burnt from a codependent relationship or been in a relationship, narcissism is very much the independent relationship, because narcissism means that they're all about themselves and they're not actually validating or meeting you in any way to connect with you and be, have you in their life. And so if you've been in a relationship with anyone that's had narcissistic behaviors or a narcissistic person, you can be really burnt. And so independence is a way of dealing with that, is a way of healing that. And so we can find ourselves being so independent that we're pushing people away and we're not energetically opening ourselves up to the opportunity to have a relationship with someone that really wants to validate us and be there for us and connect with us, right? So just sit with those two for a moment. Let's just sit with the two. Independent, where you're not allowing anyone in, or they're not letting you in, right? So they're completely self-sustained. They don't need anything from you. They're in their own bubble, and you feel like worthless in their life, right? Or you might be making other people feel worthless in their life, in your life. Codependent, where it's the other way. You're so involved in each other's lives that that if something happened, there'd be a total imbalance and very, very unhealthy dependency on that person. And so if anything happened, your whole world may crumble because of that, right? So just take a moment and sit. How does that feel to you? And love for you to hear in the chat. If you've got any questions or you want to explain, my glasses are a bit wobbly today. It's annoying me. So then we've got interdependence. Now, interdependence is something that is a word that I only just heard in the last couple of years, right? So you're telling my marriage 40 years story and now trying to break from codependency. Yeah. Well, 40 years ago, Carmel, I want you to think like the whole story is not just about you and your partner, like your husband. You've got to take into consideration 40 years ago the conditioning of society, right? Society had this thing of codependency. It was the norm. It was the way we were conditioned to see. So you think about your parents as well and the relationship they had. Their codependency was normal, and it was seen as if you weren't codependent, then there was something wrong with you. You know, you were breaking outside of the mold, and God forbid that you do that as a woman, right? So it sort of, you know, does that give you a bit of relief thinking that it was part of the process, but now that, you know, you may have shifted and evolved and become more sovereign within yourself, you have decided that pattern no longer serves you, right? Now, what happens is when one person makes that decision and the other one doesn't, unfortunately what happens is there's a break apart, right? Because if you're choosing sovereignty instead and the other person's no longer, isn't okay with that, then it's just inevitable that's that breaking apart, right? So interdependence. This is where there's this beautiful balance, mutual support, you know, healthy and supportive relationship where both of you are really comfortable being who you are. You've got your own values and morals. You've got your own life. You've created this healthy existence. You've got your own desires and needs and all of those things. And then through that you come together. So you come together, there's open communication, there's emotional sharing, there's mutual respect. Both of you are maintaining that you're an individual, but while you're doing that, you're supporting each other's growth. And oh my gosh, is this a beautiful place to be? Because this is the first relationship that I've ever experienced this, is being able to be my individual self, have my own goals, my own growth, my own experience of myself, and see that Tim is doing the same. And we come together when we need support or we just want to talk over our day or what's going on in our life. And we don't try and fix it for each other, right? That's a big thing. We don't try and fix it unless I say, hey, I really need help with this. He doesn't try and fix me. And the same with me. I don't try and fix him. And so it's really beautiful. It's a beautiful experience when you get to this space where you can have, yes, I love this. I'm fortunate to find this too. Stacey, are you in a relationship? I didn't know you were in a relationship. That's how long it's been. Love for you to put in the chat. Go on, tell us. So, interdependence. Oh my gosh, Stacey, I am so excited for you. That is so cool. Oh, I'm just, well, I'll have to get off here and ask you about it. Because I know that this is something that you've been looking for, and I know that you've done a lot of work to get here. So well done. Congratulations. November last year. Oh, that's awesome. So still in the love bubble, hey? I love that. So interdependence is a beautiful place to be. And this is where we really find our own personal space, where we can have that opportunity to pause and reflect and refine and come together as two individuals looking to support each other in our own individual experience of life, right? So I want you to consider all of the things like, where are you? And over this week, really sort of start recognizing your different relationships, because this is can be in a partnership, right? But how are you with your parents if your parents are still around? You know, are you or they in codependent relationship with you, or you know, your friends, your family, other friends and other family members as well. All of those things is really interesting. When my brother, because I grew up looking after the whole family, I remember my brother was totally fine when he was by himself, but as soon as he came into my life and he was staying at my house, he used to come and stay when I was living up in Far North Queensland, he would go into codependent big time. He would stop doing anything for himself and he would just expect me to do the whole thing. And I had to break him out of that pattern. I'm like, we are adults now and I am not looking after you anymore, sorry. And so he then switched that to his relationship in, you know, once he found a partner. Actually, I don't know. I think they're more on the, they're both codependent, I think. Yeah, it's very interesting to watch the dynamics with different people, right? How all of this breaks down, it really depends on your relationship with yourself. Because when you don't recognize who you are, when you don't actually understand who it is underneath all of the layers, and especially, hey, Carmel's 40 years is a lot of things to break apart, right? And to recognize and identify and start reflecting on. Who are you underneath all of those things? Because when we're in that pattern for so long, it becomes a natural unconscious behavior. So one of the things that I'd love to share with you is that at the end of the month, we have, not very far away, in fact, Irene, if you're still on here, I'd love for you to put I think it's on the 24th. I always forget to look at the date. I've got a lot going on, so please forgive me if I've got the date wrong. But we're having a Mad Hatter's Tea Party in here. It's free. It's a monthly mixer. We're going to be doing once a month. We're going to do a free event to really start pulling apart just one little micro adjustment in our relationships. And I wanted to start with our authentic self, really embracing who you are. And just like Alice, when she went through the looking glass, right, before she went there, she was sort of judged. You know, she wanted to just hang out and read, and she just wanted to do her own thing. And she wasn't what they wanted her to be, you know. And so whoever they are in your life, I bet you can understand that. 24th, awesome. Thank you, Irene. But when she went through that looking glass, she met the Mad Hatter and all the other magical characters, right? But the Mad Hatter really embraced her for who she was. She was like, you're just Alice. You know, he really just allowed her to be whoever she wanted to be. And because of that, she was able to explore and to grow and become more mature than when she first went through the rabbit hole. So let's do this together. Embrace ourselves. We're going to go through a beautiful meditation through the looking glass to find ourselves, to recognize who we are deep within. I've got some prizes to win as well, so there'll be a couple of 24-hour passes into my 10K Conscious Creator Circle, where we're, stripping back and being creators. There's some real beautiful goodies in there. If you own a teapot and a teacup, we would love to have you join us with that. The link is now in the chat. And we're just going to have some super fun. So if you're over being judged and you really want to come into recognizing who you are as an individual and really embracing your true self, because that's where everything starts, then I'd love to see you on our Mad Hatters Tea Party. Take care, and I'll catch you next week.